Druidic stock, and him and Elizabeth, I can tell you, are totally against Brexit because everything points to that. You see, Elizabeth wanted to be Catholic as well as Protestant. She wanted to be loyal to the insights and wisdom of Christ. And she was not a fanatical anti-Catholic. She only very reluctantly, gradually brought in legislation because some of the more extreme Catholics were now trying to assassinate her, and there were definite plots and so on. She originally, her instinct was to let people be what they are, and she said, I don't want to have a window prying into men's secret souls. We're all answerable to God. All I ask is that you don't try and assassinate me, which is a fair enough position to take. When it came to magic and so on, her position was similar. It was, I don't care if you're a magician or a witch or a wizard or a druid. After all, some of my best friends are. What I care about is if you use those powers for good or evil. If you're a druid or a magician and you use your powers to kill, harm and destroy, then that's against my laws, said Elizabeth. But if you use them to heal, to help, to bring peace, then you're a white wizard and you can come to my court and we'll put plays on about you, which is what Shakespeare was doing with The Tempest and Midsummer Night's Dream. Shakespeare was the custodian of the wizardry of Elizabeth and Dee, and it's thought Prospero was modelled on Dee. This is the true magic that Elizabethan Renaissance stood for at its best. And it stood for love. Elizabeth is famous for her various love affairs, and the Earl of Leicester, and you name it. She was a loving woman, but you wouldn't want to cross her because she had quite a fearful temper, and I don't want to cross her. And therefore, what I'm saying is, ma'am, and her descendant sits on the throne now, Elizabeth II. Let's say she's the reincarnation. I don't know. We don't want to destroy the kingdom that Elizabeth then bequeathed to us. You see, the first Elizabeth, an amazing woman, very wisely left her crown to the King of Scotland, James VI, and of Scotland, and he became James I of England, and the United Kingdom of Great Britain. And it was Great Britain that was formed on this day, on the 24th of March. Elizabeth died knowing that her kingdom was going to be safe, and it would become augmented by being joined to Scotland. It was a masterstroke of her death, and she bequeathed that kingdom to this young man, he wasn't that young, James, who'd been born at Stirling Castle, was a great Scottish intellectual, and he, like Elizabeth, was both Catholic and Protestant. He was the son of Mary Queen of Scots, who was a beautiful, amazing woman, vivacious, amazing woman. We spent a lot of her life here in France. And if you haven't seen the film Reign, a lovely film series about her, see it, with her Marys at the court in France, at Amboise. And that was his mum, right? Amazing. And she had him baptised as a Catholic, of course, because she was a Catholic. But very wisely, he was schooled by Protestant intellectuals. You see, this is the best kind of education to get. We should all be Catholic Protestants in Europe, because all that heritage is part of our wisdom heritage. It's like Leibniz, I say I'm a Catholic and a Protestant. And like Dee, you see, Dee served faithfully Elizabeth, and then before that he served Mary, who was a Catholic queen, and he served Elizabeth, and then he served James. And he said, look, I'm a magus. I'm interested in ultimate truth. Catholic, Protestant, they're approximations. I serve whoever's the monarch I will be loyal and faithful to. I'm not a rebel or revolutionary, and I will only serve by trying to point out the truth as a scholar and, magus. I'm the same. That's my job now. And anyway, Elizabeth died and left her throne to James, who then inherited this incredible kingdom. The first time Scotland and England and Wales have been united. And I that's what's at stake. If Brexit goes through, as I've tried to warn since day one, that legacy will be destroyed. Theologically, that is a crime against our history and our heritage. Because ever since 1603, for good and ill, the fates and fortunes of Scotland, England, Wales and Ireland have been bound up in one united kingdom, trying to serve God and truth and wisdom. And that's the origin of the scientific revolution. It's the origin of Francis Bacon's work, who dedicated his great book, The Advancement of Learning, to King James. And James himself tried to bring peace to Europe. He tried to solve the conflicts between Catholics and Protestants. And, that legacy, that work is still important. That should be what Britain is still doing. And that's what the European Union is trying to do. You can be a member of the European Union and a Catholic nation like Italy or Spain. You can be a member of the European Union and a Protestant nation like Sweden or Denmark. That's fine. Everybody's welcome to this table called Europe, so long as we follow that Kantian ethic of goodness, so long as we try and do that which, if it was universalised, would it make everybody happy and live in peace. And that's where the fanatics, the cultists, the Hitlers, the Stalins, the extremists of right and left fail, because what they say is, no, everybody's going to do it my way, or, they'll be killed. I mean, that's what the European Union is not tolerant about, and quite rightly. And the people that are against it, this death cult of haters, it is a psychological condition, I think, but it's got a long history, and there is a malaise in the European mind, which unfortunately it surfaced in Britain. I mean, poor old James's dream, Elizabeth's dream, ended up in a civil war as extremists started fighting, and extreme Protestants actually captured Parliament and tried to destroy the tolerance that Charles stood for. I think as an Anglican I can resonate with Charles's vision, which he tried to continue with James's vision of a sort of broad church approach. And unfortunately the kingdom degenerated into bickering and fighting and conflict and battles before you could blink. We grew out of that eventually, and we came to the constitutional monarchy we now have, whereby Parliament has a say, the monarch has a say, and the people have a say in the Commons and democracy. It's a combination of different authority poles in harmony, and that's right. That's good. I think the problem with Brexit is we haven't. The constitution is cracking at the seams, because what isn't acceptable is for any member of parliament, who may call herself a prime minister, to then take an idea that was generated by a death cult and impose it against the will of the normal decent people of Britain once they've woken up to what's going on. There has to be a second referendum. It just is so contrary to the rationality of politics that it makes no sense at all. So anyway, theology. I want to just finish with a quote from the Quran. I'm doing a commentary on the Quran at the moment, and I've already spent some years on this commentary, and I hope when I die, people will read this for hundreds of years to come, along with my commentary on the Gospels and the Psalms, and I hope I'm going to do a commentary on the complete writings of St. Paul. As a theologian, it's important. The Quran is full of many, many mysteries, and I strongly recommend, if that chap that shot all the Muslims had just done a bit of Quranic study, he would have realised it's a treasure chest. We should be studying it, not killing Muslims. There's a wonderful verse I've just been doing a commentary on earlier, on Surah 2, the cow, verse 45. This is in Medina. Muhammad is talking, actually, interestingly enough, to the Jewish community. There were Jewish tribes in Medina, and how were they going to coexist with these early Muslims? And he was trying to say, from his perspective of channeling the divine mind, how he thought they could all coexist in harmony. And the particular verse, Muhammad basically says, look, we can coexist if we all stick to our highest calling. If you stick to your covenant that you got through Moses and so on, we'll stick to ours that we're getting now through Christ and Muhammad and that lineage. And we'll all sort of meet up in infinity like parallel lines. But it's difficult. He says, we know it's difficult. We won't be able to fulfill the covenant of being British and inheriting this amazing country called the United Kingdom if we break it, if we destroy it in this generation after 400 years. I mean, I will not, be resting comfortably in my sleep after death and know that I participated and did nothing whilst my beautiful country, this United Kingdom, was destroyed. And so, no, there's an earlier verse in verse 27 of Surah 2, which says, those who break God's covenant after it is ratified and who sunder what God has ordered to be joined and do mischief on earth, these cause loss only to themselves. So the Quran, Muhammad is trying to say unity and peace go together. And the covenant, this relationship between us individually and the Creator, the Absolute, that's what the covenant means. It's translated as testament in Latin, and hence New Testament, Old Testament meant the Old Covenant, the New Covenant. Now, theologically, there needs to be a very sophisticated discussion about covenants being superseded. I would argue, along with other theologians, there's only one ultimate covenant. There's a testament between the formed world, which is what we are, and the unformed, the absolute. In a sort of Hegelian sense, I would say that the absolute contracts into becoming the particular. We are all manifestations of the absolute, but I take a covenant to be Thomas, you're the whoever you are, and each person is different, and that's the beauty of existence. That's why it's so amazing to be here, because we are the all, but we're also the part. But no part has the right, therefore, to damage, harm or hurt another part. We're all the all. And that's where the ethics of the categorical imperative comes from. Because we're all the all, we should act as if we're the all. But no, there are people that break that covenant, says the Quran in verse 27, Surah 2, and they sunder what God has ordered to be joined. Well, that to me is the Brexit position. We're going to break up the UK in ignorance. I mean, I was told this week that some of the Leave vote campaigning people during the referendum in 2016 had not even thought about the Northern Ireland situation. They didn't even know that it might become an issue. I mean, one of the main reasons I voted to remain was I'm chair of Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Ireland and Britain. I've been to Ireland many times. I'm part Irish. I've spoken about the Irish categorical imperative, why we should reject Brexit. And yet the people running the very Leave campaign, who were up to all kinds of dodgy tricks, it now turns out, literally had been that ignorant. They'd never even thought about that dimension. That sums up what we're up against, a sort of ignorance. And that's the people that are trying to sunder this kingdom of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And that's why I cannot understand why the DUP would want to break up the UK by supporting Theresa May and the Brexit lobby. The DUP should be for Remain, because it's the only way they're going to keep Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom. I mean, has nobody done any research? What's going on with these Presbyterians? They're supposed to be intelligent people. Some of the academics at Queen's University in Belfast and elsewhere are quite intelligent. What on earth are they doing intellectually? Are they all asleep? Because we don't want to sunder what God has ordered to be joined. So Brexit must be rejected, according to that verse. But it's very difficult because people act in the dark, and people have power in society who don't warrant it, and they have expertise of some little thing, and then they get elevated way, way beyond their actual capacity. I would say that's the case with most of the Conservative cabinet members. At last, Philip Hammond is beginning to speak out against Brexit. He's a reasonably intelligent cabinet member, but all these bleating sheep shouting for Brexit whenever the Daily Telegraph says, screw the torture chamber more. The Daily Telegraph is a vicious and vile and ignorant paper that is promoting Brexit because it's being promoted because of the interests of big capitalists who have their money offshore and are not British and don't live in Britain and are not interested in what is for the benefit of the United Kingdom. They're interested in what's the benefit for their own bank balances. And Rees-Mogg is typical of them because he has vast wealth which he doesn't pay tax on. It's all offshored. The guy's a crook, and yet he's one of the leading Brexiteers. You know, these people should be in prison and in the Tower, in my humble opinion. But I'm merely a theologian and philosopher, so it's not within my power to but, you know, no, I think justice, the slow, ponderous procedures of the courts and so on will eventually catch these people out. And I wish upon them all the karma of the consequences of their actions. What the Quran goes on to say in Surah 45 is it's not really possible. We can't get there except with patient perseverance and prayer. Nay, seek God's help with patient perseverance and prayer. That's the only way we can defeat Brexit. You know, when a calamity this big comes on a country, we need patient perseverance and prayer. I was a bit shocked that the Church of England, which should be the bastion and bulwark of keeping the country together, it was the church of the first Queen Elizabeth and this one now, I'm seeing a total silence from it. And I wrote to the Archbishop of Canterbury several times pointing out the catastrophe that Brexit is. I've taught religious studies in schools, you know, I've taught in Anglican schools, and I was baptised in Anglican at the University of London when I was doing my degree there in the 80s, and I have a lot of understanding of the Anglican position, which is supposed to be a moderation, tolerance, fair play. I greatly respected, you know, all the various archbishops of Canterbury's that I've lived under, going back to Carey and others, and you know, I've respected that via media that the Anglican Church proposes between Catholic and Protestant extremists. Well, I think the Anglican Church should be speaking out 100% against Brexit because it's breaking up the country. It's based on this intolerant death cult. It's got a fake interpretation of history, and behind its sort of smiley face lurks some quite sinister and dark forces. And I'm surprised that the average vicar and the average bishop and the archbishops are not speaking out more strongly about it. I think it's a lacuna, and I proposed to the Archbishop of Canterbury that he ought to lead a group of people from Canterbury yesterday and join the march. I think it would have been symbolic if the Archbishop of Canterbury and 30 of his top clerics and monks and priests had marched from Canterbury on London with the cross saying, you know, we Christians oppose Brexit. If I'd have been Archbishop of Canterbury, I would have led that march because I think he has a moral duty as the spiritual head of the Church of England under the Queen to speak truth to power. If the Archbishop of Canterbury daren't, if he's too afraid, or if he's too timid, or if he's afraid for his job, etc., you know, what do we have an Archbishop of Canterbury for? Because the original Thomas of Canterbury, the great saint who was the Thomas Archbishop of Canterbury, was a fearless man who spoke up against the tyranny of the then government, which was doing everything the Brexiteers were doing, you know, lying, stealing, cheating, robbing people, and then manipulating public opinion. Thomas had to flee here to France and was sheltered, and he went to Vézelay and many other places near where I am. And he eventually went back on an agreement, and then he was slaughtered and killed by order of the King, Henry II, who later that same year then invaded Ireland. He sent a squad of thugs to invade Ireland. That was the beginning of the Anglo-Irish Norman troubles of Ireland. The same guy that had Thomas à Becket killed, martyred, for simply speaking the truths of Christ to the power structures of his day, then said, you know what, I got away with killing Thomas, or they pretended it was something to do with him. It was. And then he said, well, you know what, I'll go and capture Ireland now. So in the spirit of Thomas Becket, what I'm saying is that the Church of England should be speaking up against Brexit with an unequivocal voice. I think the Queen should be, in her own, reserved and polite and respectful manner. And I've been corresponding with her and pointing this out. I have a duty as an Archdruid to point out these things. And I have had a reply from the Queen, taking note of what I've said. Now that's diplomatic speak for, that's all one can hope for, isn't it? That they should actually listen to one. Because the Church of England, I think, has a duty to speak out because it stands for the love of Christ, it stands for the unity of Christ, it stands for peace. Christ's kingdom is a kingdom of peace. It stands for the invisible fabric that keeps the nation together as a whole, of all its parts, England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and the Commonwealth. I mean, if England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland all break up over Brexit, the Commonwealth is going to look on with absolute shock and horror, and I'm speaking out because I'm partly Canadian. I look on this with horror. I always loved Britain. I was born in Canada. I came back because I had this romantic love of all of Britain and all of Europe. I decided in my early 20s to come and live in Britain and London. I could have settled in Canada for the rest of my life. I'd been there 7 years. I thought, I'd rather live in Europe because I love European culture. I love ancient history. I'm a classicist. I love philosophy. I love Britain. I'd rather live in Britain, London, because then I can be in part of the whole of Europe. The Canadians are looking on the shenanigans of Brexit with absolute shock and horror, as are people in other parts of the Commonwealth, my Indian friends, with bemusement. Why would a country self-destruct, they say. Okay, so we need to ask God's help with patient perseverance and prayer. However, the Quran says, that is indeed hard, except to those who bring a lowly spirit. You see, human beings are very arrogant and they like to think they know it all. They don't. This is why we rejected God, so-called, in the 19th century. The materialist scientific tradition, Darwin and co, thought, we know everything now, we can explain everything, don't need God. God, that's so old-fashioned. True thinkers, like Bacon and Queen Victoria herself, said, no, we can't reject God. And she was friends with the Duke of Argyll, who also said to Darwin, you're wrong, there can still be a room for divine intelligence, even in spite of all the sophistication of evolution. That's my position. I set up the Centre for the Study of Divine Intelligence at the Castle of the Muses. I suspend judgment on what that divine intelligence is, or looks like, but it seems to me it works through the prophets and sages of mankind, the Christ, the Buddhas, the Mohammeds, and it brings us these amazing sacred scriptures. I don't understand how it operates, and I don't understand how it forms an egg into a human being. I'm writing a book about this with a scientist at the moment. We're politely agreeing to disagree about how the egg becomes a human baby. I'm saying there's got to be some spiritual element in this process. And no, the conventional Darwinian thing, no, it's just an evolutionary thing and it just does it all automatically. I look at the intricate workings of the cell and the processes at work, and I say, no, there's some kind of divine intelligence at work here. That's what forms us, and then infuses the baby with the soul at a certain point in that evolutionary process. Now, the materialist will say, no, that's all nonsense, Well, okay, we can agree to differ. We can have a philosophical discussion about it. The Quran is on my side, and that's why I love the Quran and all the other holy scriptures of mankind. And this one says, look, you won't be able to get that help from God unless you have a lowly spirit. And I would say, therefore, to my fellow anti-Brexiteers, a lowly spirit is humility. And I think that what I've observed with the Brexiteers and their arrogance is that there's a tremendous kind of, we won the referendum in 2016, we're going to do Brexit, you just are going to have to lump it kind of attitude. And I've seen this in Theresa May and her hard Brexiteer colleagues, Rees-Mogg, all the crew that are behind Brexit have this incredible arrogance and hardness of heart. Boris Johnson had it. All these, and it seems to be a primary condition for joining the death cult that is Brexit. It's a sort of arrogance. And I find it very disturbing because, yes, British people can be arrogant. And I remember as a child when I was at school, I was accused of being arrogant. It was like, well, I don't think I was. I loved learning, I loved knowledge, I loved debating with my teachers. I don't think that's arrogance. I think that's just being slightly precocious and wanting omnivorously to know everything. I mean, that's my right as a human being, I think. But it's important to temper that precocity with humility, and that's why later, when I read all the scriptures and read the Bible fully and understood what Christ was going on about humility, saw it reflected in the Quran, the penny drops. You realise that any wisdom or intelligence you have from your precocity should be put at the service of humanity as a whole. This is where I think Marx got it slightly wrong. I mean, my mother was a Marxist. I love some aspects of Marx's tradition, and he was a great precocious thinker. I respect that, but he was a bit arrogant, and it's like my way or the highway, Marxism or we oppose you. I don't agree with that attitude. I can see where he got it from because he was very clever, but because he lost faith in spirit, in Geist, he became puffed up with his own intellectual theories about explaining economics and so on. He thought that was all you need to know, and it became very arrogant. And that leads to Pol Pot and Stalin, this kind of brutalistic, we are the best, we are the only way attitude, which is wrong. Ethically, it fails the Kantian ethic test of the categorical imperative. It's not acting in the best interests of the entire planet. It's acting in the interests of your cult. Marxism was another cult, essentially. So the counter to that is humility, and this is why this verse is so important in the Quran. Indeed, it's hard to get patient perseverance or to hear God's help unless you bring to it a lowly spirit. And that means true humility and a sense of solidarity with all of us in this mess. I mean, one of the other complaints I've heard directed against those of us that want to stay in the European Union is, oh, you're just a kind of middle class, upper class sect. The working classes all voted for Brexit. I reject that utterly and totally. I mean, the working classes did not vote for Brexit, and those that had thought it through definitely didn't. The evidence shows that the working classes of Britain are going to be the most severely affected and hit by Brexit. So, it's a false argument. Humility means to know the limitations of one's intellectual ability to encompass all ultimate realities. There are always realms. However far you go, you may become a Buddha, you may become relatively omniscient, you may have enlightenment experiences. But there's always going to be things beyond that you can grow to. And even among the communion of saints, there's humility. So if we succeed in stopping Brexit, if there's a revote, if there's a referendum that's won, there shouldn't be kind of arrogant rejoicings, we won. It's well, where do we go next? How do we work together to heal the wounds of our country? How do we understand where this Brexit cult came from? I think there should be legal inquiries into the funding of the first campaign, and I think the second campaign should be robustly and fiercely, fairly run, and foreign funding and data probes like Steve Bannon and his cronies were doing should be completely disallowed. Somehow the Electoral Commission has to ensure that this second referendum is robust. And no doubt we can have a national debate about that. So anyway, I want to move on to the third part. I've shared a little bit. There's one final quote I want to come to in the theological side of things. And this is important. And this is a psalm. I think I'll come back to that at the very end of this talk, actually, because I will finish with that. And don't forget that I've invoked this important day, the 24th of March, as the day in which the United Kingdom came into being, when James became king. I'd hate that that gets broken up on my watch. What I want is that we fulfil the best potential that we stand for as a country, rather than just self-destruct. And do it in association with the European Union. You know, the UK is a wonderful country by being part of the European Union with our fellow European nations, Germany, Austria, Sweden, France, you name them. We can all work together in that harmonious way that Kant said we should be doing. We can will the categorical imperative for peace. I would like Britain to be pioneering the way for a peace mediation service in Europe. I wish to God Brexit never happened, possibility, and instead we've been campaigning for a European Union mediation service, and it could be based in Edinburgh. This is a much better way to spend our time than to fuss over this ridiculous nonsense. Should we kill ourselves and destroy the world or not? Type of argument that Brexit represents. Okay, I want to move on to the third part of this talk, which is political. I've talked about the philosophical, I've talked about the theological a little bit. I want to talk about the political now, and I think yesterday's huge march was wonderful politically. You had speakers from the Scottish nationalist position, you had people from Labour, from the Conservatives, from the New Remain group, and the Liberal Democrats. I saw Vince Cable in the march with some of his Liberal Democrat activists, and looking very dapper, moving along with his great banner. And this was a historic march yesterday. I think Mr. Corbyn should have been there. I think it was wrong. I think ethically Corbyn hasn't read his Kant, which is sad because so many of the great socialists and social democrats of Europe have read their Kant, and it's one of the great arguments for social democracy. I don't think Corbyn is an intellectual. I don't know what he is, but he seems to want to grow stuff on allotments, and he should be happy doing that. The Labour Party needs a genuine intellectual, someone of the stature of John Smith, who I used to respect greatly, whose grave I've seen on Iona. That was a true Labour leader. He would have made mincemeat of Brexit. He would have just completely, within a couple of debates, he would have outfoxed this Theresa May and her Tory cronies. Corbyn isn't able to do that. There are some great speakers and intellectuals in the Labour Party. Let them come to the surface. Mr. Corbyn, stop blocking progress. Now, if he is fanatically pro-Brexit all along, he should be open about that and resign and join a Brexit party. Maybe he belongs in UKIP. I don't know. He can found his own Brexit Socialist Party or something. He doesn't belong in the Labour Party, which is a mainstream, left-of-centre, social democratic party that believes in the Kantian ethic of the categorical imperative and believes in peace, believes in social justice and all these causes, and therefore should be opposing Brexit. There's no ifs or buts. It must oppose Brexit. Now it's become obvious what Brexit stands for, which is the catastrophic self-destruction of a nation, the resumption of violence in Northern Ireland, the resumption of conflict in Northern Ireland, So, it's interesting, just a little reflection. I did teach, when I was training as a teacher, I taught at Adams Grammar School, and that's where Jeremy Corbyn studied as a boy. He was a student there. He got abysmal A-levels. If I'd have been his teacher, I would have improved his